This wellness session is provided to you by the CCHS Wellness Team. Please contact CCHS Wellness at cchealth.org if you have any questions. My name is Luca, and today I'll be talking about queer platonic love letters as a way to reimagine intimacy and connection with one another. Some highlights: I am a queer, trans, non-binary, mixed-race clinician practicing on unceded Chochenyo Ohlone land, or Oakland, California. I identify as disabled and neuroqueer. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns. If folks want to learn more about me, they can read from this page or go to my website where I share more about my clinical practices and values. Some reminders for today. Queerness has always existed at the intersections of race, class, gender, age, spirituality, and disability. Throughout this video, I will be intentionally highlighting the experiences of queer and trans people of color while acknowledging that there is no way to cover all the nuances that exist within our abundant communities in 9 minutes. That being said, here's where we're going with the time we do have. I invite folks to notice any sensations, thoughts, and feelings that come up for them as we dance through today's topics. I encourage leading with curiosity and kindness, observing what these different parts might be asking for from you. Because most systems do not center queerness in their formation, organization, and/or practice, queer and trans people of color have learned to do it ourselves. We have always found ways to stay connected and take care of one another. The colloquial term for one form of this collective care is chosen family, which are intentional, non-biological kinship bonds that are marked by their intensity. For many queer and trans people of color, chosen families provide healing from family of origin attachment wounds. One example is houses from underground ballroom culture in the 1970s. In these houses, Black and brown, queer and trans folks formed families where they would adopt the same surname. The house mother or father was played by a queer elder, making everyone else the children. These communities were critical during the AIDS crisis in the US, especially because many people's nuclear families refused to acknowledge their illness and take care of them. Queer and trans folks swapped knowledge about which doctors to go to, how to get the necessary medication, how to organize against Big Pharma, and ultimately cared for each other while hundreds of their loved ones were dying, and often while they themselves were dying. What's clear is that chosen families are created out of necessity, not just in times of crisis, but also because we want to see ourselves reflected in each other, because we crave a sense of belonging, and because we get to love ourselves by loving each other. When I think about chosen family, I think about queer platonic love, and vice versa. Because queerness so often pushes against the norm of how things quote-unquote should be, chosen families and queer platonic relationships are opportunities to expand on notions of intimacy, romance, and caring for one another. Within these relationships, we get to love without bounds. Queer platonic relationships also push against the pedestal that heterosexual marriages are put on. Queer platonic relationships allow folks to claim meaningful love outside of prescriptive definitions of what is romantic, platonic, or sexual. For many, this can be deeply transformative and healing in dreaming of queer futures. Here are some ways that queer people of color have defined their chosen family and platonic love. I'll let folks read this slide on their own time. Of queer friendships and love, activist and poet Alok Raj Menon recently wrote, "I want a world where friendship is appreciated as a form of romance. I want a world where when people ask if we are seeing anyone, we can list the names of all of our best friends and no one will bat an eyelid. I want monuments and holidays and certificates and ceremonies to commemorate friendship. I want a world that doesn't require us to be in a sexual or romantic partnership to be seen as mature, let alone complete. I want a movement that fights for all forms of relationships, not just the sexual ones. I want thousands of songs and movies and poems about the intimacy between friends. I want a world where our worth isn't linked to our desirability, our security to our monogamy, and our family to our biology. Within the frame of queer platonic love, love letters can take on a new meaning and purpose. They can be romantic, cheesy, and abundantly intimate. They can be for the everyday. The importance of letters is further reinforced through these existing queer letter writing projects. Some are dedicated to queer platonic love, some consist of letters of queer folks writing to themselves, and some are about sending love to incarcerated queer and trans folks of color. So, how are love letters a wellness practice? Love letters are an important form of documentation for queer communities because not all of our history gets preserved, which can be a form of healing in and of itself. A received love letter can be a resource we look back on when we need reminders of being loved and supported. Giving a love letter can also help us slow down and articulate gratitude, joy, and delight for our communities. Love letters can be a way for us to challenge internalized homophobia, transphobia, and sexism that prevents us from sharing intimacy with people who are not our romantic partners. And finally, love letters can be a form of resilience as we continue to show up with love even when having basic rights threatened on a regular basis. In the spirit of queerness, love letters can take on any form: a poem, a book, a photograph, a dance, a music video. Here's an example of my own queer love letter. To my dearest friend Jill, when you call me to ask me if I have eaten and tell me what you are making, I am reminded of how feeding each other is an act of care. I first learned this from my mom. She taught me about the power of food and the ways that it can communicate love in the absence of verbal language. I feel so cared for when you think of me and my hungry stomach, and when you make meals according to my sensory needs without complaint. I delight in being able to sit across the table from you and laugh together, so at ease. I have always longed for this kind of easy intimacy. I am so glad that I have found it here with you. I offer the following prompt for folks when thinking about giving a love letter. What is a moment in one of your friendships where you felt truly loved and celebrated as you are? What happened in your body? How might you want to share that with the person you have in mind? An alternative prompt is to reflect on who in our ancestry would we write a love letter to? Who would you thank for your opportunities, gifts of knowledge, and/or sources of sacred healing? For some of us, we might have been taught that intimacy only exists in purely romantic or sexual relationships. If a love letter can be whatever you want it to be, what would you make it? What would you say? My closing offering is this. When we tap into our collective love for each other, we are able to feel more connected, more supported, more empowered in confronting a world that is not always kind, that is not always designed with us in mind, and that does not always root for our survival. Queer and trans people of color have been doing this transformative healing work since the very beginning. Like many other marginalized communities, we know what it means to feel and be alone, to be forgotten, to be targeted, to be thought of as wrong or inferior, to be shamed, and to do what it takes to survive. We need each other in this life, and we must remember to cherish one another. Thank you for listening.